There is something many of us rarely stop to question. We move through life believing that what makes us tired, stressed, or overwhelmed is everything happening around us. Work, relationships, responsibilities, unexpected problems. It all seems like too much. But if we slow down for a moment, just long enough to really look, we may begin to notice something different. It's not always the situation itself that drains us. It's what happens in the mind after the situation appears. A moment happens. Something small. A conversation, a message, a mistake, a delay. On its own, it's simple. Neutral, even. But almost immediately, the mind begins to move. It starts to interpret. It starts to judge. It starts to imagine. And before we realize it, we are no longer dealing with the situation. We are dealing with the story the mind has built around it. That story can be heavy. It can turn something small into something overwhelming. It can take a single moment and stretch it across hours, even days, through repeated thinking. And the most important part is this. We usually don't notice when it's happening. We don't say, "I'm thinking right now." We say, "This is real." That shift, from seeing a thought as a thought, to believing it as truth, is where the weight begins. Because once we believe it, the body responds. A simple thought like, "Something is wrong," can create tension. The heart rate changes. The muscles tighten. A sense of unease appears. And now, the experience feels real, not because the situation changed, but because the mind created a reaction. Then something else happens. The mind sees that reaction and uses it as proof. If I feel this way, it must be true. And just like that, a loop is formed. Thought, right pointing arrow, reaction, right pointing arrow, reinforcement, right pointing arrow, stronger thought. This loop can run so quickly that we don't even see the beginning of it. We only feel the result: stress, anxiety, frustration. And over time, it becomes familiar. So familiar that we begin to think this is just how life is. But what if it's not? What if the heaviness we carry is not coming from life itself, but from the way the mind continuously interacts with it? This doesn't mean thoughts are the enemy. Thinking is natural. It helps us plan, reflect, and make decisions. But not all thoughts are useful. And not all thoughts deserve our attention. The problem is not that thoughts appear. The problem is that we follow every thought as if it matters equally. Especially negative thoughts. They tend to pull us in more strongly. Not because they are more important, but because the mind is wired to focus on what feels threatening, uncertain, or incomplete. So when a negative thought appears, it often carries more weight. We lean into it. We explore it. We build on it. And without realizing it, we give it energy. Imagine a small spark. On its own, it fades quickly. But if you keep feeding it, adding more and more, it becomes a fire. Thoughts work the same way. They do not grow on their own. They grow with attention. This is why simply trying to stop thinking doesn't work. The more we try to push thoughts away, the more attention we give them. And the more attention we give them, the more present they become. So the question is not, how do I stop thinking? The question becomes, how do I stop being pulled into every thought that appears? This is where a subtle but powerful shift begins. Instead of trying to control thoughts, we begin to notice them. We begin to see that a thought is simply something that appears in the mind. Not a command, not a fact, not a definition of who we are. Just a mental event. And in that moment of seeing, even if it lasts only a second, something changes. We are no longer completely inside the thought. There is space. And in that space, there is a different kind of experience. Less urgency, less pressure, less weight. This is not something we need to force. It begins with something very simple. The next time a negative thought appears, instead of immediately reacting, try to notice it. Just for a moment. This is a thought. You don't need to push it away. You don't need to replace it. You don't need to solve it. Just see it, because sometimes, that small moment of awareness is enough to interrupt the entire pattern. And when the pattern is interrupted, even briefly, the mind begins to experience something new, a sense of space, a sense of lightness. And from that space, inner peace can begin. Once we begin to notice that negative thoughts are not simply caused by life itself, a deeper question naturally appears. Where do these thoughts actually come from? Because if we don't understand the root, we will spend our time trying to manage symptoms, reacting to each thought as it appears, without ever seeing the pattern behind it. And that pattern is not random. Negative thinking doesn't just happen out of nowhere. It follows certain tendencies, certain habits, certain internal structures that have been built over time. One of the most important things to understand is this. We don't experience reality directly. We experience reality through interpretation. Every situation we face is filtered through our past experiences, memories, beliefs, and expectations. These filters operate so quickly that we rarely notice them. We assume we are seeing things as they are, but in many cases, we are seeing them as we have learned to see them. For example, two people can go through the exact same situation and feel completely different about it. One sees it as a problem. The other sees it as something manageable. The situation is the same, but the interpretation is different, and that interpretation is what shapes the thought. Much of this comes from past experiences, especially emotional ones. If we've been hurt, rejected, or criticized in the past, the mind becomes more sensitive to similar signals. It starts to anticipate them, even when they are not clearly present. A simple comment may be interpreted as criticism. A neutral response may be interpreted as rejection. Not because it truly is, but because the mind is protecting itself based on what it has learned before. This protective function is not wrong. In fact, it is meant to help us survive. The mind tries to predict what could go wrong, so we can avoid pain. It scans for potential threats, even subtle ones, and prepares us for them. But when this function becomes overactive, it creates a constant sense of alertness. We are not just responding to what is happening. We are responding to what might happen. And most of the time, what might happen never actually does. Yet the body still reacts. The tension is real. The stress is real, even though the cause exists only as a possibility in the mind. Another layer of this pattern is habit. If we have spent years thinking in a certain way, that way becomes familiar. And what is familiar feels automatic. The mind tends to follow the same paths over and over again, like walking the same trail every day. The more we walk it, the clearer and easier it becomes. So when something happens, instead of exploring different perspectives, the mind quickly returns to what it knows. If it is used to worry, it will worry. If it is used to self-doubt, it will doubt. If it is used to expecting the worst, it will go there first. Not because it's true, but because it's familiar. This is why simply telling yourself to think positive often doesn't work. The deeper patterns are still there, and unless we see them clearly, they continue to guide our thinking in the background. There is also something very subtle that happens when thoughts arise. We don't just experience the thought, we become the thought. Instead of saying, "There is a thought that I'm not good enough," we say, "I'm not good enough." That small shift makes a huge difference. Because now, the thought is no longer something passing through the mind. It becomes part of identity. And when identity is involved, the emotional weight becomes much stronger. But if we slow down and observe, we may begin to notice something important. Thoughts change constantly. They appear, shift, and disappear throughout the day. If they were truly who we are, they would not change so easily. This realization creates space, and in that space, we begin to see that thoughts are events, not definitions. Another important insight is this. Negative thoughts are not the real problem. The real problem is our relationship with them. If a negative thought appears and passes without being held onto, it leaves little impact. But when we engage with it, analyze it, believe it, repeat it, it gains strength. It becomes something we carry. So instead of asking, "How do I stop negative thoughts?" we begin to ask, "How am I relating to the thoughts that appear?" This shift changes everything, because now, we are not trying to control the mind. We are beginning to understand it. And understanding brings a different kind of clarity. Today, I want to invite you to notice something very simple. The next time a negative thought appears, pause for just a moment. And instead of reacting, ask yourself, is this what is actually happening, or is this my interpretation of it? You don't need to answer immediately. Just asking the question creates space. And in that space, you may begin to see that the root of the thought is not the situation, but the lens through which you are seeing it. Once we begin to see where negative thoughts come from, the next question becomes even more important. Why do they affect us so deeply? After all, they are just thoughts. And yet, they can shape how we feel, how we act, and even how we see our entire life. The answer lies in something very subtle, something that often goes unnoticed. We don't just think once. We think again, and again, and again. A single moment happens, a conversation, a mistake, a situation that doesn't go as expected. On its own, it passes quickly. But the mind does not let it end there. It replays it. It reinterprets it. It adds more to it. And each time it does, the emotional response returns. Not because the situation is happening again, but because we are recreating it in our mind. This is one of the most powerful loops we live inside. We are not just experiencing life as it happens. We are experiencing our thoughts about life, repeatedly. And each repetition strengthens the emotional impact. It's like watching the same painful scene over and over again. Every time you watch it, you feel it, even though nothing new has actually occurred. Another layer of this loop is how the body responds. The mind does not clearly distinguish between what is real and what is vividly imagined. When a negative thought appears, especially one tied to fear, worry, or self-doubt, the body reacts as if the situation is real. Heart rate changes, muscles tighten, breathing shifts, a sense of unease or pressure builds. And once the body reacts, the mind uses that reaction as confirmation. If I feel this way, it must be true. And just like that, the loop deepens. Thought right pointing arrow, feeling right pointing arrow, belief right pointing arrow, stronger thought. Over time, this loop becomes so familiar that we stop questioning it. We assume the feeling comes from reality. But in many cases, it is coming from repetition. Another important part of this pattern is amplification. The mind rarely stops at one thought. It expands. A small concern turns into a bigger one. A simple mistake turns into a story about failure. A moment of uncertainty turns into a fear about the future. And each step feels logical in the moment. But when we step back, we see that the mind has moved far beyond what actually happened. Most of the scenarios it creates never occur. Yet they still create real stress, real tension, real suffering. There is also a strong tendency to hold on to negative thoughts longer than positive ones. A compliment may stay with us for a few minutes. A criticism may stay for days. Not because the criticism is stronger, but because we keep revisiting it. We replay it, analyze it, question it. And in doing so, we keep it alive. The mind is not just reacting. It is maintaining. Another subtle pattern is the belief that thinking more will solve the problem. So when something feels uncomfortable, we try to think our way out of it. We analyze. We search for answers, we try to gain control. But most of the time, this doesn't lead to clarity. It leads to more thinking. And more thinking leads to more confusion. We get stuck in a loop where thinking becomes the activity itself, not the solution. We also tend to merge our identity with our thoughts. Instead of saying, I am having a thought that I'm not good enough, we say, I am not good enough. That shift turns a temporary mental event into something that feels permanent. And when it feels permanent, the emotional weight becomes much heavier. But if we look closely, we begin to notice something important. Thoughts are constantly changing. What feels true in one moment may disappear in the next. If thoughts were truly who we are, they would not shift so easily. This realization creates space, and in that space, something new becomes possible. We begin to see that suffering is not created by the first thought. It is created by what we do with it. If a thought appears and fades, it leaves little trace. But when we hold on to it, repeat it, build on it, it becomes something we carry. So the question is no longer, how do I stop negative thoughts from appearing? The question becomes, am I continuing the loop? Because the moment we stop feeding the loop, it begins to weaken. Not instantly, but gradually. And each time we step out of it, even for a moment, we experience something different. Less pressure, less noise, more space. Today, I want to invite you to notice one thing. The next time a negative thought appears, pause for just a moment. And gently ask yourself, am I adding to this, or am I just seeing it? You don't need to force anything. Just notice, because in that moment, when you stop adding, the loop begins to break. And where the loop breaks, freedom begins. Now that we've seen how negative thinking works, and why it creates suffering, the most important question becomes very real. What do we actually do in the moment it happens? Because understanding the concept is one thing, but when a negative thought appears suddenly, strong, emotional, convincing, it doesn't feel like theory anymore. It feels real, immediate, personal, and in those moments, the mind reacts fast. So letting go is not about doing something complicated. It's about changing very small things, in very real moments. The first step is awareness. Not deep awareness, not perfect awareness, just noticing. Most of the time, we don't notice that we are thinking. We only notice how we feel. We feel anxious, tense, or uncomfortable, and we assume the feeling is coming from reality. But if we slow down, even slightly, we may begin to see that behind the feeling, there is a thought. And that moment of noticing is everything. Because once you see it, even briefly, you are no longer completely inside it. So the first step is simple. This is a thought. You don't need to argue with it. You don't need to fix it. Just recognize it. The second step is not reacting immediately. When a negative thought appears, the instinct is to either follow it or fight it. We either go deeper into the story, or we try to push it away. But both keep us engaged. Instead, we try something different. We pause. We don't add anything. We don't continue the story. We don't try to solve it right away. We let the thought be there, without building on it. At first, this may feel uncomfortable, because the mind is used to doing something. But if we stay, even for a few seconds, we begin to notice something surprising. The thought does not stay the same. It shifts. It weakens. It begins to pass. The third step is returning to the body. When we are caught in thinking, our attention is completely in the mind. But the body is always in the present moment. So we gently bring attention back. To the breath. To the sensation of sitting. To the feeling of our hands, our feet. We don't need to force it. We just reconnect. And that reconnection pulls us out of the loop, even slightly. The thought may still be there, but it no longer has full control. The fourth step is not continuing the story. This is one of the most important parts. A negative thought is rarely just one thought. It leads to another, and another, until a full narrative is created. But that narrative only grows if we keep adding to it. So we interrupt it at the beginning. We don't go to the next sentence. We don't follow the next idea. We stop where it is. Like stopping a domino before it falls. The rest cannot continue. The fifth step is allowing the feeling. Even if we stop feeding the thought, the emotional response may still be present for a while. This is where many people return to thinking, because they don't want to feel uncomfortable. But if we can stay with the feeling, without trying to remove it, something changes. The feeling begins to move. It rises, and then slowly fades. Not because we forced it, but because we didn't resist it. Allowing is not the same as liking. It simply means not fighting what is already there. And when we stop fighting, the experience softens. The sixth step is patience. This is not a quick fix. These patterns have been built over time. So they unwind over time. There will be moments when you forget. Moments when you get pulled back into the loop. Moments when the thought feels overwhelming again. That's not failure. That's part of the process. What matters is that each time you notice, you return. And every return strengthens your ability to stay present. Over time, something becomes clear. Thoughts still come, but they don't take over as easily. They don't define your experience in the same way. And in the spaces between them, you begin to feel something different. A sense of lightness. A sense of calm. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer caught in every movement of the mind. Today, I want to invite you to try something very simple. Just once, the next time a negative thought appears, pause, take one breath, and instead of following it, just see it. That's enough, because sometimes, one moment of not reacting is all it takes to begin changing everything. As we begin to practice letting go of negative thoughts, something important happens. We realize that it's not as simple as just letting go. Because the moment we try, we often create a new kind of struggle. Not with the thoughts themselves, but with the way we are trying to deal with them. And if we don't see this clearly, we can get stuck in a more subtle loop, one that feels like progress, but still creates tension. The first mistake is trying to force the mind to stop thinking. This is one of the most common reactions. We notice that thoughts are the problem, so we try to eliminate them. But the mind doesn't work that way. The more we try to push thoughts away, the more attention we give them. And attention is what keeps them alive. It's like trying not to think about something. The more effort you put into avoiding it, the more present it becomes. So instead of stopping thought, we need to change how we relate to it. The second mistake is replacing negative thoughts with positive ones, too quickly. At first, this seems helpful. A negative thought appears, and we immediately try to counter it with something positive. But if this is done mechanically, it becomes a form of suppression. The original thought is still there, just pushed beneath the surface. And when the situation becomes more intense, that suppressed thought can come back stronger. True change doesn't come from swapping thoughts. It comes from seeing thoughts clearly, without needing to follow them. The third mistake is overanalyzing. When a negative thought appears, we try to understand it. Why am I thinking this? Where did this come from? How do I fix it? And while some reflection can be useful, too much analysis keeps us inside the thinking process. We are still engaged, still feeding the loop. Sometimes, clarity doesn't come from more thinking. It comes from stepping out of thinking altogether. The fourth mistake is expecting immediate results. We want to feel better right away. We want the thoughts to disappear quickly. But these patterns have been built over years. They don't dissolve instantly. When we expect fast results, every moment of difficulty feels like failure. And that creates more pressure, more frustration, more thinking. Letting go is not about instant change. It's about consistent awareness. The fifth mistake is not recognizing thoughts as thoughts. This is the most subtle, and the most important. If we don't see that we are thinking, we are already inside the thought. At that point, it feels like reality. And no technique works, because we are not applying it from outside the thought. We are applying it from within it. Recognition is the key. Without it, everything else becomes difficult. The sixth mistake is using letting go as a form of avoidance. Sometimes, we say we are letting go, but what we are actually doing is avoiding. We don't want to feel discomfort, so we try to move past it quickly. We tell ourselves, it doesn't matter, or, I should let this go. But inside, the feeling is still there. Unseen, unprocessed. Letting go is not about escaping the experience. It's about allowing it fully, without holding on to it. If we don't allow it, we can't release it. The seventh mistake is trying to be calm all the time. After learning about awareness and letting go, we may create a new expectation. I should always be peaceful. And when negative thoughts appear, we feel like something is wrong. But nothing is wrong. Thoughts will continue to arise. That's what the mind does. The shift is not in stopping thoughts, but in not being controlled by them. You don't need to be perfect. You only need to be aware. When we look at all of these mistakes together, we begin to see a common pattern. We are always trying to do something to the thoughts. Fix them, change them, control them, understand them. But the more we try to do, the more we stay engaged. Letting go is not about doing more. It's about doing less. Less reacting, less adding, less believing every thought completely. And when we begin to do less, something very natural happens. Thoughts are no longer constantly fed. And when they are not fed, they begin to lose strength. Not because we removed them, but because we stopped giving them energy. Today, I want to invite you to notice one thing. The next time a negative thought appears, instead of asking, "How do I get rid of this?" ask, "Am I doing anything right now that is making this stronger?" Just see. Because the moment you see that, you are already beginning to let go. After everything we've explored, how negative thoughts arise, where they come from, why they create suffering, how to let them go, and the common mistakes we make along the way, we arrive at something very simple, yet deeply transformative. What happens when thoughts no longer control you? At first, this might sound like a distant idea. Because for most of us, thoughts feel constant. They appear all day long, shaping how we feel, how we react, and how we see ourselves. So it's natural to assume that if thoughts are always there, they must always have power. But what changes is not the presence of thoughts. It is our relationship with them. Thoughts still arise. They still come and go, just as before. But something subtle shifts. We no longer follow each one. We no longer believe every story. We no longer react automatically. And in that shift, there is space. That space is not empty in a negative way. It is open, light, stable. It allows thoughts to pass without leaving a heavy trace. Before, a single thought could pull us into a chain reaction. Now, it appears, and fades. Before, we felt defined by what we thought. Now, we begin to see that thoughts are just experiences. Not identity, not truth, just movement in the mind. And as this becomes clearer, something else begins to emerge. A quiet sense of calm. Not excitement, not intensity, but a steady kind of ease. A feeling that we don't need to change anything in this moment to be okay. This is what inner peace begins to feel like. It's not about removing all discomfort. It's about not being overwhelmed by it. Emotions still come. There may still be moments of frustration, sadness, or uncertainty. But they don't take over in the same way. They are experienced, without becoming the center of everything. Like waves in the ocean. They rise, they fall, but the ocean remains. And we begin to recognize that we are not just the waves. We are also the space in which they move. Another important change is how we respond to life. We are no longer reacting from a place of pressure or fear. We respond with more clarity, more presence, more stability. This doesn't mean we always respond perfectly. But there is less urgency, less tension, less need to control everything. And that alone changes how we experience even difficult situations. There is also a lightness that begins to appear. We are not carrying every thought. We are not holding on to every story. We are not trying to fix ourselves all the time. That weight starts to dissolve. And without that weight, there is freedom. In relationships, this becomes very clear. We are no longer expecting others to make us feel complete. We are no longer holding on to them out of fear. We can be present with people, without needing them to be a certain way. Because we are no longer depending on them for our inner state. That creates a different kind of connection. More honest, more open, more real. One of the most beautiful parts of this shift is how simple life begins to feel. We no longer need constant stimulation. We no longer need everything to be just right. Even ordinary moments carry a sense of presence. Sitting quietly, walking, breathing, nothing special. And yet, there is a quiet sense of enough. This is not something we create. It is something we notice, when the mind is not constantly pulling us away. It's important to remember that this is not a final state. There will still be moments when we get caught in thoughts again. Moments when old patterns return. Moments when we react without awareness. That's part of being human. But now, we notice sooner. We return faster. And each time we return, the patterns lose a little more of their strength. Over time, something becomes very clear. Peace was never something we had to build. It was something that was always there, beneath the noise. And when the noise softens, even for a moment, what remains is what we've been searching for all along. Today, I want to leave you with something very simple. The next time a thought pulls you in, the next time you feel overwhelmed, pause, just for a moment, and gently ask yourself, do I have to follow this? You don't need to force an answer. Just asking the question creates space. And in that space, you may begin to see that you are not the thought. You are the one who sees it. And from that seeing, peace begins.